Hi! So last time we discussed that there were two methods how messages may pass in nervous tissue. And these were electrical signals down the axon of a neuron and chemical messages across the synaptic gap. And we will be focusing on these electrical messages as we look at propagation of an axon potential in a neuron. And this is mainly possible thanks to three important ions. And we will look at calcium, sodium, and potassium. And how this works is that on the surface of a nerve cell, at the cell membrane, we've got various channels which let some materials into the nerve cell and other materials out from the nerve cell. And the most important of these channels that we will look at first is our sodium-potassium pump. What happens in a sodium-potassium pump is that for every 3 sodium ions that get pumped out, 2 potassium ions are brought in. If you do your math and add the pluses and minuses, you will end up noticing that in relation the inside of the nerve cell becomes slightly negative while the outside of the nerve cell is slightly positive. And in fact, it is going to be 70 millivolts. That's the negativity of the nerve cell in relation to its outside. And this 70 millivolts is what we call resting potential of a nerve cell. So this is the normal state of electrical charges in a nerve cell thanks to our sodium-potassium pumps. Well, what happens next is that there's some sort of a stimulus that triggers an action potential in a nerve cell. And as this happens, the sodium channels open and sodium rushes inside the cell. Well, consequently, now inside of the nerve cell starts to become more and more positively charged. And if you look at the word, what's happening here is depolarization. Let's think of for a moment what it means if we have a polarized situation. In a polarized situation, we have two extremes that are far from the middle. And depolarization would be an opposite of that. We're approaching the middle ground. So in depolarization, thanks to our sodium rushing inside the cell, the electrical current inside the cell approaches zero. It might even shoot a little over that. Now, the situation can't stay this way forever. We must eventually return back to the normal. So what happens next is repolarization. We are returning back to the polarized state of charges in relation to the inside and outside of the nerve cell. And this is thanks to the sodium channels closing, and now channels that are responsible for getting potassium out of the nerve cell start working. And the inside of the nerve cell becomes negative again. We might actually go slightly below the negative 70 millivolts. And this is actually quite important because this gives us a short period of time before we have returned back to the normal resting potential of a nerve cell. So during this short period, which we call a refractory period, another nerve impulse cannot cross that site. So it gives us kind of a recovery time from the action potential. So there we have the stages of action potential and why it happens. And this is where I traditionally finished with my normal students, but we are going to do a little bit better than that. So let's remember that what we've been looking at in terms of the action potential applies only for one point of a nerve cell over a time. And really, during an action potential traveling as a signal down to action, we will notice that the same events are repeated throughout the entire distance of an action, only slightly later as we proceed further down the axon. So that's it for this video.